All right, Greece and Rome. We've heard of this a lot in school. We were spoon-fed it, shoved down our throat. The period known as classical antiquity. This is classical antiquity for the Europeans. Mind you, this is to go forward. Every time you hear them talking about something, you have to understand that most of the time they're talking about themselves, not everybody else. So when they say the classical period of antiquity, that is the European classical period, not African, Indus, Kush, China, or the Americas classical period. But they try to superimpose it upon us like this is the classical period for everybody, which is basically their narcissistic personality or tendencies that they are number one. Okay, so it in the period known as the classical antiquity began with the emergence of the city states. They didn't know whether they wanted to be a city or a state of ancient Greece. And these city states were actually not identified in ancient Greece. This is a modern term that we're using for the different tribes of Greece, right? Because some were just cities and that's all that they had. So they were in a certain state of being. Not all the Greeks were friendly to each other. Just like today, not all African Americans are friendly to each other. Later, the Roman Empire came to dominate the entire Mediterranean basin. The migration period of the Germanic people, this is the name that the Romans gave to them. That's not what we today we call the Germans in the country called Germany. This is a name that was given to all the tribes of Europe by the Romans. They called them the Germanic tribes, the Goths, the Visigoths, Vandals, the Picts, Fishians, all of those names that they were called. Now, with the migration period of the Germanic people, I'm saying it nicely because it was a migration. It was actually an overthrow of Rome. Rome had been sticking a knife into the side of these people for ages. And as Rome became weaker, these Germanic people began to migrate towards Rome. And then gradually, with incursions in various parts of Rome or the Roman Empire, caused Rome to be shut off from the rest of the world that had knowledge and put Europe into the Dark Ages. So think of somebody walking around in your house turning off all the lights, not turning them off because that's nice. They take a stick and they break all the lights so that you can't turn it back on. Now you're in the Dark Ages. So Europe put itself into the Dark Ages by cutting itself off from the rest of the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of the rest of the world. And they stayed in there for approximately 1,000 years. Now, in the book called Stolen Legacy, written in 1954, by Sir George G. James. Stolen Legacy by George G. James argues that the philosophical ideas of ancient Greece were actually derived from ancient Kemet. James contends that the Greeks traveled to Kemet and borrowed heavily from Kemetic thought, but failed to acknowledge their debt. This plagiarism, according to James, has led to the misconception about the origins of Western philosophy, giving credit to the Greeks for ideas that truly belong to the Kemetians. You also get a copy of this book when you get the PDF. You can click on the image and it will download the book to your computer. On page 59, James says, the history of the following ancient theory of the four qualities and four elements provides the world with the evidence of the Kemetic origin of the doctrine of A, opposites and contraries, B, change or transmutation, and C, the life function of the universe is due to either of the four elements, fire, water, air, or earth. So you've heard those terms before, but you may not have known that it comes directly out of Kemet through Greece into Rome. They go into the Dark Ages. In about 711 AD, the Black Moors go into Spain. As they're there, they translate the Latin and Greek information of Kemet into Arabic language, right? Because at the time, nobody in their area was speaking the Kemetic language, but these Africans learned Greek language and Latin language, and they then translated what the Greeks wrote and what the Latins wrote into Arabic, later to be translated into English from the Arabic. But no one is given credit but the English people and the Greeks and the Romans. They did not giving credit to the Moors that facilitated that information coming back into Europe. This ancient theory was expressed by a diagram formed by outer and inner squares. The corners of the outer square carried the names of the elements: water, air, fire, and earth. The corners of the inner square, being at the midpoint of the sides of the outer square, carried the four fundamental qualities of cold, hot, moist, and dry. The diagram explains that fire is hot and dry, earth is cold and dry, water is cold and moist, and air is hot and moist. Accordingly, water is the embodiment of cold and moist qualities. And when the cold quality is replaced by the hot quality, the element water is changed into the element air with hot and moist qualities. Consequently, transmutation is definitely implied in the teachings of this symbol. In the next class, we will go into this symbol and break it down and show you how it can be applied in everyday life. That will be the Master Key class. Here, we focus mainly on the calendars used in the Roman Republic, 509 to 27 BCE. So the Julian calendar, first it was the Roman calendar, then Julius Caesar made adjustments to the Roman calendar after he had his affair with Cleopatra VIII. And he also produced a child out of wedlock. They were not married, and Julius Caesar had a wife back in Rome that he was neglecting. So Cleopatra had his nose wide open. As known as the Republic calendar, the Roman calendar was known as the Republican calendar. It is the earliest calendar system for Rome which we have historical evidence. It was used until 46 BCE when it was replaced by the Julian calendar inspired by Cleopatra. The Romans had a 10-month calendar. When Julius Caesar had his fling with Cleopatra, she introduced him to the 12-month calendar. Julius Caesar then adjusted the Roman calendar to be like the Julian calendar. And this is why we have 365 days in the year, because it's really a Kemetic calendar with Julian names for the month. Is your friend Julius Caesar?
The Romans in the days of the Republic had 12 months of varying amounts of days, the same as we do today. However, their calendar still only added up to 355 days, and the religious officials in Rome had extreme power over the lengths of months and years. People being people, the pontiffs would often use the calendar as a political tool, shortening or lengthening politicians' terms by literally taking and giving days. This calendar fiddling would mess with people's ability to keep the days straight and added to the issues already present in the Roman calendar. Not only that, but the Romans were really weird in the way they actually discussed dates in day-to-day life. Anyone who has read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar knows that Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March. But what does that actually mean? Romans would count their days based off 3 key dates in every month: the Calendae, the Nones, and the Ides. These 3 dates were used as reference points that were counted forward or backward from in order to represent specific days. The Ides were the middle of each month, and either occurred on the 15th or the 13th, depending on the month. The Nones were on the 5th or the 7th of each month. Calendae was on the first day of the month, and that is where we get the word calendar from. Unfortunately, the solar year isn't actually 365 days long. It's 365.2422 days long. This horrible number practically necessitated reform, something which the Egyptians realized pretty quickly, considering Ptolemy III was already recommending adding a leap day every 4 years in 238 BC. But Egyptians are nothing if not stubborn. Jump forward 12 Ptolemies and 200 years, and Egypt still hadn't adopted the leap year until Julius Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, you may know him as Augustus, decided enough was enough. He just conquered Egypt and forced them to have a leap day every 4 years. Strangely enough, though, the reform that Julius Caesar made actually came from Egypt, not Rome. In 48 BC, a Sicilian named Apollodorus entered Julius Caesar's apartment in the dead of night with a rolled up blanket on his back. Once unfurled, inside was a 21-year-old girl who would, incidentally, change the calendar forever. Her name was Cleopatra. She had recently been ousted from her throne by her brother in a coup, and was coming to ask for Caesar's help in restoring her to power. Needless to say, Caesar was quickly seduced by her beauty, and he agreed to help. He ordered her brother, Ptolemy XIII, to co-rule with Cleopatra, and in celebration, Cleopatra threw a huge party. According to the Roman poet Lucan, Caesar first heard of the Egyptian solar calendar from a scholar at this party, and this inspired him to reform the Roman calendar once he returned home. In 46 BC, Julius Caesar gathered the best living philosophers and mathematicians in order to reform the Roman lunar calendar into an Egyptian-style solar calendar. Ultimately, they ended up just agreeing with Ptolemy III and determined that the year should be 365 days long, and every 4 years an extra day should be added. In order to actually achieve this reform, Caesar added an extra 67 days to that year and called it the last year of confusion. But everyone else just called it the year of confusion. Luckily for us, though, they were mostly right about the length of the year, and the calendar now drifted by only a single day every 134 years. The Romans in the days of the Republic had 12 months of varying amounts of days.
This is a sculpture of the Cleopatra that Julius Caesar had interactions with. Now, I'm not making any judgment on their ages, but you see, she was very much younger than him. What she did it out of necessity because she wanted to take over her brother's throne, Ptolemy, one of the Ptolemies. There was, I think he said 16 or 18 Ptolemies, which is a title, not an actual name. Just like the word Cleopatra is a title, it's not her name. One of the Cleopatras was actually called Bernice or Bernica, Bernice, which came into English as Bernice. So he was probably in his 40s, 50s. She was 21. Now, the Arabs, right? We talked about the Dark Ages. That was the Dark Ages only for Europe, not the rest of the world. Only for Europe. Everybody else was doing fine without them. The Arabs coming along after Muhammad, and the Arab migration into the region of Northwest Africa lasted from 7th to the 17th century, right? That means from about 600 BC, 600 AD to about 16 to 1800 AD, for about almost 1,000 years. That's the same time that the Europeans were in the Dark Ages. And we had colleges, cities, and astronomical equipment that the Moors recreated from the drawings that they got from the leftovers of the Greeks and the Romans. So here, the X marks the spot. This is Arabia. And they migrated west across top West Africa. Here's a time line. So we go from 500 AD to 17th century or 1600 AD, this short period of time, right? So from 600 AD to about 1600 AD, the Arabs, whether they white, black, or mixture of white and black, that's where we get Semitic people from. Semitic people is not a separate people in and of themselves. It's just a mixture of anybody that mixes with another race is called a Semitic, because the word Semitic means semi, part this and part that. It is not a race of people. There are no Semitic people. There are Semitic speaking people because they're speaking a mixture of African language with the language that was in the Middle East, which was the Chaldean, later to become the Mesopotamians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Persians. They're all basically live in the same area. So here we have what the Arabs, as they became stronger and they were Muslims, they started conquering other territories that once belonged or was once taken over by the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. First, Africans was in this area first. This is where we get Mesopotamia from. It's considered to be a group of Africans that migrated from Africa and went into the land of the Middle East and they set up shop between two rivers. Today, we call this Meso, between Potamia, rivers. Mesopotamia is a modern word that means between the two rivers. It is not what they called themselves. They were called the Sumerians. Sumer was what they called their area. So as they're migrating west, right, they come across the Suez Canal. Mind you, there is no Israel as of yet, because Israel is a construct that was made within the last 1947, 27, last 80 years. And they moved west, they took over all of this area. The region is called Maghreb, from the Arabic language meaning west. That's all the word means, is west, right? The setting sun, going toward the setting sun. These are the names of the countries that they inhabited. Mind you, these borders did not exist. These borders did not come until the Van Daan Conference in Europe, where the Europeans divided up Africa for themselves. So when the Arabs came in, none of these names were applicable to the area. We call it by these names now because this is basically all that we know today. So you have Mauritania. You see the word Maury in there. You have Morocco, named after the Moors. So we said Maghreb means just literally it's a word that was Romanized, and it was actually called Al-Maghreb by the Arabs, which just means going west, into the west. And these are the symbols on the flags of these different countries that the Arabs took over. Notice they all have they all have moon and stars. Has nothing to do with their religion. They were into studying the stars and the cycles. And many of the stars today still have Arabic names to them from that time that they were translating the text. Islamic astronomy played a significant role in the revival of ancient astronomy following the loss of European knowledge during the Dark Ages, notably with the production of Latin translations of Arabic works during the 12th century. The Dark Ages. From 500 AD, right? Remember, Muhammad wasn't born until around 600 AD. So the Europeans going into the Dark Ages had nothing to do with us. This was an internal problem that they were having that cut them off from the rest of the world. They were in the Dark Ages from 500 AD to 1500 AD. During that time, the Arabs was the scholars of the world. A significant number of stars in the sky, such as Aldebaran, Altair, Deneb, and astronomical terms such as Alidade, Azimuth, and Nadir are still referred to by their Arabic names. So the word azimuth, like I was saying before, we're using Latin and Greek words, and we calling it English. We also use Arabic words. There's Kemetic words that have been anglicized, and we think these words are native to English, but they're not. So here, right, the azimuth and the nadir, right? Azimuth is the height of an object in the sky, and the nadir is the high point. Is that correct? No, nadir is the low point, the azimuth is the high point. I'm sorry. Are still referred to by the Arabic names. A large corpus of literature from Islamic astronomy remains today, numbering approximately 10,000 manuscripts. Mind you, the printing press didn't come until 1500 AD. All this was handwritten. Manufactured 10,000 manuscripts scattered throughout the world, many of which have not been read or cataloged. Even so, a reasonably accurate picture of Islamic activity in the field of astronomy can be reconstructed.